The command came so sharply that the entire ballroom froze. "Kneel and apologize, Vanessa," Lockwood said, her voice smooth but cold enough to slice through the orchestra music. Every guest at the charity auction turned toward the man standing in front of her, waiting to see if he would actually obey. Adrian Morales didn't move. He stood in the center of the polished marble floor, holding a tray of empty glasses, his server's uniform simple compared to the glittering gowns surrounding him. Moments earlier, Vanessa had accused him of spilling wine on her designer dress. Cameras from the charity press wall were still flashing nearby. "Did you not hear me?" Vanessa asked, tilting her head slightly as if speaking to someone beneath her notice. She was the daughter of the Lockwood banking dynasty, and everyone in the room knew it. People shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent. No one challenged a Lockwood. Adrian placed the tray slowly on a nearby table. "I heard you," he said calmly. The confidence in his voice surprised people. Vanessa's eyebrow lifted, amused. "Then kneel," she repeated, "or I'll make sure you never work in this city again." A few guests chuckled nervously, assuming the scene would end quickly. Across the room, the charity host hurried toward them, whispering apologies before Adrian could even respond. "Oh, Miss Lockwood, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," he said anxiously. "He's new. I'll have him removed immediately." Adrian remained perfectly still. The host turned to him urgently. "Just apologize, son," he muttered under his breath. "Save yourself the trouble." His voice carried the tired wisdom of someone who understood how power worked in rooms like this. Vanessa folded her arms, waiting. But Adrian didn't kneel. Instead, he glanced toward the stage where a large screen displayed the evening's program schedule. His expression changed slightly, not anger, not fear, but something closer to patience. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Adrian said quietly. The sentence confused the room. Vanessa laughed softly. "You're refusing?" she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. "You're a waiter." Adrian met her gaze without hostility. "Tonight, yes." Whispers rippled through the guests. The orchestra had stopped playing entirely now. Even the photographers leaned forward, sensing something unusual unfolding in the middle of the event. Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice but not her arrogance. "You clearly don't understand who you're speaking to." Adrian gave a small nod. "Actually," he said, "I do." Before she could respond, the charity director suddenly rushed onto the stage, tapping the microphone with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice slightly breathless, "before we begin the final auction item, we have a very special guest to recognize tonight." The giant screen behind him lit up with a photo, a younger man in military uniform. The director smiled broadly. "Our keynote donor this evening requested anonymity until now," he continued. "But after everything he's done for veterans housing across the country, we felt it was time to properly introduce him." Guests turned toward the stage, then back toward Adrian, because the photo on the screen looked exactly like the man Vanessa had just ordered to kneel. The director lifted his hand toward the crowd. "Please welcome tonight's honoree, Mr. Adrian Morales." And suddenly no one in the room was laughing anymore. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chandeliers hanging above the ballroom. Every head slowly turned from the massive screen back to Adrian. Vanessa Lockwood didn't move at first. The confidence that had filled her posture seconds earlier drained from her face as the photo behind the stage continued glowing above the crowd. It was unmistakably the same man, same calm eyes, same quiet composure. The charity director stepped forward again, forcing a nervous smile as he realized what had just unfolded in front of hundreds of guests. "Mr. Morales?" He called gently into the microphone. "Would you join us on stage?" Adrian didn't rush. Instead, he calmly picked up the tray he had set down moments earlier and handed it to another stunned waiter standing nearby. The young server held the tray awkwardly, as if it had suddenly become something historic. Without a word, Adrian began walking toward the stage. The guests parted instinctively as he moved forward, like a quiet tide shifting out of his way. Soft whispers rippled through the ballroom. "That's him?" someone murmured. "The donor," another guest whispered. "The veteran?" Vanessa remained frozen where she stood.
God.
For the first time in her life, she was no longer the most powerful person in the room. When Adrian reached the stage, the charity director extended his hand. "Sir, I didn't expect your reveal to happen quite like this," he said with an awkward laugh that only half the room returned. Adrian accepted the handshake with the same calm expression. "It's all right," he replied. Unexpected moments usually reveal the most truth. The words were not loud, yet they carried clearly across the silent ballroom. Guests began glancing subtly toward Vanessa. The charity director cleared his throat and gestured toward the giant screen behind them. 3 years ago, he began, Mr. Morales founded the Haven Project after returning from military service. Since then, he has personally funded the construction of more than 400 housing units for homeless veterans. A murmur of admiration spread through the crowd. The director continued, his voice steadier now. Tonight, he has pledged another $20 million to expand the program nationwide. The ballroom erupted into applause, this time real applause, not the polite kind that filled charity events. Vanessa slowly lowered her arms, her earlier command echoing painfully in her mind. "Kneel and apologize." Adrian stepped closer to the microphone and looked out across the ballroom, the gowns, the tuxedos, and the billion-dollar reputations carefully arranged around polished tables. For a moment, his eyes settled briefly on Vanessa. "I prefer to stay out of the spotlight," he began calmly. "That's why I attended tonight the way I did. Sometimes the best way to understand how people treat others is to remove the titles. When you walk into a room as a donor, everyone smiles. When you walk in as a waiter," he paused before finishing quietly, "you learn who people really are." The silence returned, deeper than before. Then Adrian gestured toward the screen showing a small apartment complex with American flags on every balcony. "These homes belong to men and women who once wore uniforms so the rest of us could live freely." Applause returned again, but somewhere in the room, someone looked like they wished the floor would open beneath them. Vanessa Lockwood had spent her entire life in rooms like this, rooms where power flowed through bank accounts, family names, and quiet deals made over crystal glasses. She had never once felt small in one of them, until now. The applause for Adrian slowly faded, but the weight of his words lingered in the air, like a truth no one could comfortably ignore. Vanessa remained near the center of the ballroom, every whisper around her sounding louder than it actually was. She told him to kneel. Someone murmured, "Did you hear that?" Another voice whispered, "That was him?" Vanessa's jaw tightened. Across the room, Adrian stepped away from the microphone as the charity director continued explaining the Haven Project. Large screens now displayed images of veterans standing proudly in front of their new homes. Children running across small playgrounds built beside the buildings. The crowd watched with admiration, many nodding quietly at the impact of the project. But Adrian's attention had shifted, and after a moment, his eyes found Vanessa again. There was no anger in his gaze, no trace of revenge, just quiet recognition, as if he understood the storm of thoughts now moving behind her composed expression. The charity director leaned slightly toward Adrian and lowered his voice. "Would you like to say anything else?" he asked politely, giving him another opportunity to address the room. Adrian shook his head gently. "No speeches," he replied. "The work matters more." The director nodded respectfully and stepped back toward the podium to continue presenting the charity's initiatives. As Adrian stepped down from the stage, the room parted again to let him pass. Some guests reached out to shake his hand, offering admiration and congratulations. Others simply nodded with newfound respect as he walked by. Vanessa didn't move. For the first time since she was a child attending high-profile events with her parents, she didn't know what the correct move was. When Adrian reached her, he stopped. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa lifted her chin slightly, instinctively rebuilding the composure she had been trained to maintain in public. "You made your point," she said quietly, her voice controlled but tight. Adrian studied her expression for a moment before answering. "I didn't come here to make a point," he replied calmly. Vanessa let out a short breath, a hint of defensive pride creeping back into her tone. "Really?" she said, because the timing felt very convenient. Adrian's voice remained steady. "If I wanted to embarrass you, Miss Lockwood," he said gently, "I would have said your name during my speech." The sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Vanessa blinked as the realization slowly settled in. He had protected her reputation, even after she had publicly humiliated him. "You didn't," she said quietly, almost more to herself than to him. "No," Adrian replied.
"Oh."
A long silence stretched between them as the surrounding conversation slowly resumed. But the energy in the room had changed. The charity event was no longer just a glamorous evening. It had become a lesson. Vanessa exhaled slowly, then something unexpected happened. She stepped forward, and in front of dozens of watching guests, Vanessa Lockwood lowered herself slightly, not fully to her knees, but enough to make the message unmistakable. "I owe you an apology," she said clearly. The room fell silent again, as Adrian looked genuinely surprised, not because she apologized, but because she meant it. Vanessa straightened, meeting his eyes without arrogance this time. "I judged you in seconds," she admitted. "And I was wrong." Adrian studied her face carefully for a moment before giving a single nod. Apology accepted. The tension in the ballroom finally broke. But the story of the night wasn't over yet, because the woman who had ordered someone to kneel had just learned what real dignity looked like, and everyone in the room would remember that moment far longer than any auction bid. The rest of the evening felt different after that moment. The auction resumed, donors raised their paddles, and the orchestra carefully restarted its music, but the atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. People were no longer just watching numbers climb on the screen. They were watching Adrian Morales, the man who had walked in as a waiter and quietly changed the tone of the entire room. At one table, two investors leaned toward each other. "Did you see what he did?" One whispered. "He didn't humiliate her. Could have." The other nodded slowly, watching Adrian across the room. "That's the kind of person people actually follow," he replied quietly. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood alone near a tall window overlooking the glowing city lights. For the first time at an event like this, she wasn't surrounded by people trying to impress her. Instead, she was thinking about the sentence Adrian had spoken earlier that night. "When you walk in as a waiter, you'll learn who people really are." The words echoed louder in her mind than any applause the ballroom had given him. Meanwhile, Adrian had quietly stepped away from the crowd again. A few veterans attending the gala approached him one by one, shaking his hand and thanking him for the Haven project. He listened to each of them carefully, giving them the same respect and attention he had shown everyone throughout the night. He never once looked back toward the stage. Recognition had never been the reason he came. After the final auction item closed, the charity director returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "tonight we've raised over $42 million for housing and veteran support programs." The room erupted into cheers and applause. But before the celebration settled, the director added something unexpected. "And we owe much of tonight's success to the generosity and humility of one man." He turned and gestured toward Adrian, standing quietly among the guests. The spotlight shifted across the ballroom and stopped on him. Guests stood again, applauding even louder than before. Some clapped out of admiration, others out of respect for what they had witnessed earlier that evening. Adrian gave a small nod of appreciation, but he didn't step forward into the light. Instead, he gestured toward the veterans standing beside him. "This was always for them," he said simply, his voice calm but sincere. Across the room, Vanessa watched carefully. Something inside her had shifted as well. It wasn't the loss of power, she still had plenty of that. But she now understood that respect worked very differently from authority. Before the evening ended, Vanessa walked toward Adrian one last time. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him quietly. "About the apology?" Adrian nodded once. "I know." Vanessa hesitated for a moment, then added something else. "Your housing project, the Haven project. My family foundation could help expand it." Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly as she continued quickly. "I'm not asking for credit. I'm asking for the chance to help." For a moment he studied her expression, then smiled faintly. "Helping usually starts with listening," he said. Vanessa nodded. "Then I'll start there." Across the ballroom, cameras continued capturing the glamorous end of the gala, but the real story of the night wasn't the money raised or the luxury surrounding it. It was the moment everyone would remember, the moment a powerful woman ordered a man to kneel, and instead learned how powerful dignity could be when it stands.